I understand the frustration you all feel working in this industry for many years. I too continue to be at a loss with the lack of trust clients have with their contractors. Because they think we're all the same, that all applications do the same thing. They don't take time to realise if they simply choose the right method for the site, then they could save themselves a significant amount of money. But why do they keep choosing the standard application? Because it's cheap. The typical revegetation project usually has 3 parties involved, and good results are obtained if all 3 parties can act collaboratively to ensure that the desired outcomes are achieved. If the cheapest option mentality is embraced by any or all of the participants, a good outcome is rarely achieved. Are you a client? Often the client issues documentation prepared at development application stage, where the emphasis is on receiving development approval rather than ensuring that a revegetation process is in place which will achieve the desired outcome. Budgets are prepared, the project is approved and tenders are invited. Outdated or inappropriate vegetation specifications are sometimes used, and as there is not sufficient time during the head contractor tender process to resolve revegetation issues, least cost tenders are accepted on the basis that issues will be sorted out in the construction phase. These negotiations invariably result in cost increases which can lead to disputes involving all 3 parties involved in the project. Are you a head contractor? During the construction phase, the successful head contractor invites tenders from revegetation subcontractors based on the contract documentation and revegetation specification. The shortcomings or anomalies in the specification now come to the fore, and requests for revision of specification requirements and variation to tendered rates are submitted to the client. If an agreement cannot be reached between all 3 parties, then an adversarial relationship develops. The client has assumed that the project documentation is adequate and would not lead to escalation of costs. The head contractor has an agreed schedule of rates, so is unable to accommodate increased costs from the subcontractor, and the subcontractor either cannot comply with the client's requirements at the rates in his subcontract agreement, or submits a tender that is unacceptable to the head contractor based on cost. Are you a revegetation subcontractor? Are you having difficulty securing work because your quoted rates are too high when they are based on your analysis of what the costs are based on work you have done? Have your rates been accepted on a project and you find out when you start that the information supplied at tender time was inadequate, and you have been advised by the head contractor what the client assumed they would be getting, and your contract rates are now inadequate? Has the head contractor on site advised that their interpretation of what is required is different to yours, requiring additional works and materials which you have not allowed for, and you've been further advised that if you request a variation, the contract agreement will be cancelled? These situations, unfortunately, are not rare and invariably end up with poor outcomes. They are usually the result of undue haste in getting projects approved and commenced in short time frames, with inadequate documentation which is not fully realised until well in the construction phase. Poor results are accepted at practical completion, as all the parties involved strives to finish what has not been an enjoyable experience and then move on. The poor results obtained are often explained away by suggesting there was some serious problem with the site soils and allegedly beyond anyone's control. So all parties take a loss in an effort to get the project completed. How do we collaborate effectively when they won't listen? What we have to do is to make them want to pay attention. We have to offer them something worthwhile. We have to show them over and over again until it sticks. We know why projects get good results. When the right application is used, it is specific to the site we're working on. Inland Rail Parks, the Narromine project, or Bitumen as we call it, is a great example of where these methods and processes have been implemented, achieving the results the clients expect. P2N outlines how VHR collaborated with the Australian Rail Track Corporation and the InLink joint venture between BMD Constructions and Fulton Hogan to determine and prove what was the right solution for the site to ensure initial and sustainable long-term grass growth was achieved in the poor quality soils. Large-scale civil engineering construction projects often have the problem of highly variable and poor quality topsoils. We were contracted to revegetate the disturbed surfaces along some 103 kilometres of P2N's existing rail corridor, except for the capping, ballast rail and the single access track over a completed area of 2 million square metres. The original specifications for revegetation were agreed to be inadequate, requiring collaboration between ARTC, InLink and VHR to develop an appropriate methodology to ensure a successful outcome was achieved without reworks. Water for germination and establishment was also determined to be an issue due to the large scale of the project. There would not be sufficient water along the alignment, nor would it be possible to apply it to the revegetation areas. Also, at the time of revegetation in late 2019 and early 2020, central New South Wales was experiencing a record-breaking drought. As such, conditions for germination of grasses were not favourable. These contributing factors meant that an application that eliminated the need for maintenance watering had to be applied to the disturbed areas in the rail corridor. It was agreed that trials on the North-West link, which was 5.3 kilometres long and had 60,000 square metres of revegetation areas, would be undertaken to determine the viability of the best practice approach. Following acceptable results of the North-West link, the application methodologies was adopted for the remainder of the works. The ability to ameliorate the soils in situ, along with preparing and covering large areas in a short time frame, became paramount in achieving program milestones. The process and the method. The approach adopted was based on our experience on over 30 million square metres of applications since 2005. We commenced operations in 1981, and as our machinery and process developed, in 2005 we realised that results being obtained were unsatisfactory. So we developed a process and trialled it on the Brunswick Heads bypass. The trial was carried out collaboratively with the principal, the head contractor and ourselves, and the results achieved were acknowledged as one of the best outcomes for recent freeway developments. The process was a simple one. Progressively testing the soils in locations over the length of the project where a variation in soil type was encountered and altering the mix to suit the results. Due to the scale of the project, it was not feasible to ameliorate in stockpiles, therefore the ameliorants were applied to soils in situ, requiring no manual or mechanical mixing in of ingredients. This table provides data to give a better idea of the quantities required on this project according to the soil test reports. The application relied on the top-down approach in accordance with soil test results, would incorporate fine and microfine ingredients to ensure penetration into the soil surface and to work their way down the soil profile as the root system begins development. This methodology saw the ameliorants included in the Hydromulch application infiltrating into the soil as rainfall was received. All ameliorants and fertilisers used in this project are commercially available, such as microfine agricultural lime and gypsum and organic compost to AS 4454. Annual, perennial and native grasses, organic and inorganic fertilisers and other ameliorants as indicated in the soil scientist report were also included in the mix. Seed species and application rates for the project were developed in consultation with the ARTC and local agronomists. Soil surface preparation was also an important part of the revegetation process. Site topsoil was spread on the furrowed, untreated subgrade in the revegetation areas and then lightly scarified to produce furrows parallel to the rail line to catch rainfall. Embankments on site were treated with a batter chain implement to loosen the topsoil to produce a moisture storage depth and leave furrows parallel to the contours for moisture retention and water erosion control. This approach would ensure that not only the short-term annual grasses would germinate and stabilise the revegetation areas, but also that the soil structure would be improved as the applied ameliorants rejuvenated the soil chemistry and microbiology to kickstart the natural revegetation process and continue to support the perennial and native grasses in long term as they survived and hardened up using the moisture stored in the loose topsoil layer. The results. For the northwest link trial section, drought conditions followed the initial application in August 2019, and the application remained dormant on the surface for 3 months after initial application. Dust control was not required on the completed works, which were on the edge of the city with major roads and development immediately adjacent. When drought-breaking rainfall was received, the application washed into the surface, the annual grasses germinated, and as the annuals hayed off, the perennial grasses germinated so that a full grass cover developed by the end of autumn and the following April. Some of the revegetated areas suffered inundation prior to the grasses germinating, and when the waters receded after a week or so, the grasses germinated and developed a full cover of annuals and perennials without any rectification works. Results were monitored throughout the germination process by conducting drone flights over various sections of the project at different germination stages. All stages of germination were observed in the following stages of development on the grass cover. The germination of the annual grasses is used to quickly establish cover on the surface and thus stabilise the revegetation areas to prevent erosion. Secondly, haying off of annual grasses following their development approximately 2 to 3 months following the initial germination. Thirdly, germination of perennial grasses which are used to provide more permanent stabilisation of disturbed areas. These events occurred while the grasses are haying off. Fourthly, germination of native grasses which occurred approximately 12 months following the initial application. Maintenance watering. Most revegetation specifications have requirements to water the application areas to aid the germination and ensure project slope stability at handover. If we effectively water these areas, what kind of costs are you actually looking at? For the east coast of New South Wales, we assume an area requires 10 to 15 millimetres per week plus evaporation. For the sake of this conversation, we'll ignore evaporation and look at 15 millimetres of rainfall per week. For a job size of 100,000 square metres, we need 1.5 megalitres per week. For this arbitrary site, we're going to use 30,000 litre water tankers working on a 1 hour turnaround. This is 50 loads per week. Ignoring the cost of the water as it could be site one, this is $8,750 weekly or $227,500 for a 6-month maintenance period. The 2 million square metres of revegetation on the inland project was completed in 100,000 square metre blocks every 3 to 4 weeks depending on site progress. Due to the rapid program, this meant that up to 300,000 square metre blocks would have to be under irrigation during extended dry periods. This was logistically impossible, so a solution was required which would remain dormant on the surface until adequate rainfall arrived and would also not require maintenance. Weeds. An application tailored to the site was developed with the ability to ameliorate the soil to effectively outcompete emerging weeds and sustain short and long-term cover. The applications on the project achieved both sustainable short and long-term growth and therefore stabilisation by ensuring the application suited the site soil requirements. These innovative applications can be applied to any site with poor quality topsoils and are particularly useful for control and growing sustainable revegetation. This feature substantially increases site sustainability. Overall, a successful project result was delivered with client acceptance without rectification works at practical completion, or even during the 2-year maintenance period. This was due to VHR using a site-specific application, which also saved the client money by not having to carry out maintenance watering or rectification works during the maintenance period. Maintenance costs can be hefty on projects, especially where the revegetation has not been very successful, introduced grasses not effectively suppressing emergent weeds. For example, let's look at a basic maintenance crew cost and work out 6 monthly maintenance figures. For this example, we will assume that no specialist equipment is required, with maintenance crews visiting the site 2 times in the 6-month period. Their works would be for basic maintenance, such as spot spraying and brush cutting, which is $70 per hour per person, plus $100 for incidentals. The approximate cost for 6-month work out at $17,238 for every 100,000 square metres. This equates to 3 cents per square metre per month per 100,000 square metres. When you assess larger projects with longer maintenance periods, you can clearly see this figure for basic maintenance blows out to a large degree. For the P2N project, the savings on maintenance for the 2 million square metre and 6-month maintenance period were in the order of $300,000. The second project we've included in this discussion is the Oxley Highway to Kundabung project. Site works began on the Oxley Highway with a standard RMS Hydromulch application. This application, however, failed due to limited fertiliser in the mix, which offered very little in the way of providing the required nutrients deficient in the soil. Also, the standard R178 application assumes an ideal topsoil, which is rarely available on civil construction sites. Initial seeding works up to the 21st of August 2015 were carried out in accordance with specification requirements, and results were poor in that germination after rainfall was patchy, and the grasses after the initial strike exhibited signs of severe stress after initial germination, with growth to about 50mm height, when grasses generally turn yellow before dying back, leaving extensive bare areas after about 2 months. Surviving cover crop grasses became colourless and spindly before eventually haying off, with weeds then predominating. On our own initiative, in early July 2015, we took topsoil and subgrade samples for testing and experimented with various combinations of emulsions and monitored results. From the results and recommendations for these site soil tests and our experience since 2005, a site-specific application was designed. The site-specific application included Hydromulch to R178 specifications, plus an additional approximately 7,000 kilos per hectare of fertilisers and emollients. Microfine emollients were used to improve the solubility, to increase the rate at which they were absorbed into the topsoil and through to the subgrade. The intention of this ameliorated application is to stabilise the soil by improving soil structure, increasing the macro and micronutrients to stimulate plant growth, while also boosting microbial activity. This led to improved nutrient release from the site soils for recycling to sustain long-term germination and development of the grasses and natives. The site topsoil was deficient in calcium, nitrogen, phosphorus and potassium, with very little organic content, resulting in poor microbial activity and nutrient recycling. Site 1 mulch initially was also mixed in with the topsoil, which resulted in a nutrient drawdown, again not compensated for in a standard application. Inorganic fertilisers and emollients were a necessity for these soils to stabilise the soil surface and promote healthy germination. In areas where the standard application had been used, the annual grass germination was patchy and the emerging grasses yellowed and died off very quickly due to ineffective additives applied to the topsoil in the standard R178 application. This premature yellowing of grasses can easily be noted on many highways and freeway revegetation projects. It is easily recognisable and relates to the lack of appropriate fertilisers and emollients in the application used, which is not site specific. After the standard application failed, the head contractor instructed that the site works treated with the standard Hydromulch application were to be retreated with the ameliorated application, which became the adopted choice for the remaining revegetation works. The comparison in results showed the ameliorated application to be successful on site, stabilising the soil, establishing effective erosion control and promoting long-term germination and plant development. We note that the AS4454 organic compost is an important part of the long-term revegetation process to rejuvenate the microbiological process for long-term plant development and carbon absorption. We also note that performance of the application relies on adequate rainfall, which washes materials into the loose surface. Once the emollients have infiltrated into the soil, grasses can begin to germinate and results are seen. The works on site have shown that the ameliorated Hydromulch application can withstand heavy rainfall without failure. The application itself will remain dormant on the surface until adequate rainfall arrives. The purpose of utilising fine and microfine materials in our application results in faster absorption into the topsoil surface. Our applications have a tendency to wash in rather than wash off batters following rain events. Due to the increased absorption rate of these materials in comparison to standard conventional hydromulch, our applications tend to establish at a faster rate. Polyacrylamide binder is used to bind the wood fibre and application ingredients together to form a paste bound into the soil surface, thus providing erosion protection for the topsoil until adequate rainfall for successful germination begins. The polymer binder is re-wettable so that it does not form an impervious layer on the surface, restricting the leaching of water into the loose topsoil. Site works were also required to be scarified prior to application, providing the essential loose and roughened surface for seed and ameliorant penetration. A correctly prepared application area will always exceed the performance of a poorly prepared area. This comes with a minimal cost when completing trimming works in comparison to reworks. Good preparation will provide the best results and ultimately the most effective erosion controls and stabilisation methods. This allows rainfall, seeds and ameliorants to penetrate the soil surface and establish an effective cover. Grassroot systems can establish, providing effective erosion control. Ameliorants are efficiently improving the soil structure, microbiological activity and nutrient cycling, and working towards restarting the natural revegetation process. To recap, an understanding of how results are achieved and acceptance of specification feasibility are both crucial for any project. It will save money by not having to complete reworks or carry out any maintenance watering, rectification for practical completion or during the maintenance period. An example of how using insufficient applications can cost you more in the long run can be shown in this table. The project was on the Pacific Highway where the soil was tested and applications were developed according to the results. However, the contractor elected for a cutback application for some of these areas instead of following the soil test recommendations. By the end of the projects, some of these areas had been sprayed 4 times and repeat applications were sprayed with the same standard application up until a result was achieved. Curiously, this was when the calcium content of the repeat applications exceeded the quantity required following soil analysis. As for costs, the table shows the total spend from the contractor as a percentage of the cost of revegetating in accordance with the site-specific soil testing. It costs the contractor in excess of 200% of what it should have. If they had followed the soil test recommendations and chosen the right application at the start, they would have saved themselves time and money spent on re-spraying these areas repeatedly. Weed seed is present in all topsoils and is the natural process for weed generation, which is the stabilising part of the natural regeneration process, and usually includes the uncontrollable proliferation of weeds by wind-blown seed from established weed colonies immediately adjacent to the works. Therefore, the most effective form of weed control is by competition from perennial grasses and native plants. So it is essential that full cover of perennial grasses is established early in the revegetation process to prevent weed development. The importance of the introduction of microbe-rich compost. Plants use the energy of the sun to change water and carbon dioxide into a sugar called glucose. Glucose is used by plants for energy and to make other substances like cellulose and starch. Cellulose is used in building cell walls. Starch is stored in seeds and other plants as a food source. To fuel growth and division, bacteria need to find their favourite food and be able to digest it completely. Their food of choice is a simple sugar called glucose. Microbes in soil help to decompose organic matter, foster soil aggregate stability so that the soil does not disintegrate when flooded, and so increases its water holding capacity. Recycle and regulate carbon, nitrogen and phosphorus. Fix nitrogen for plant uptake. Increase the available plant root area for nutrient uptake. Degrade pesticides. Improve soil structure and help control diseases. Compost on its own cannot restart the natural revegetation process. It needs help from fertilisers and emulsions to address deficiencies in the soil chemistry and improve the soil structure. The chart on the screen is a comparison of the solids content of the various hydraulically applied growth medium based on information available. Gypsum is a recognised clay breaker, and post-application test results indicate that it can penetrate to a depth of 300 millimetres in about 3 months, taking the microbes, fertilisers and emulsions with it. The compost conditions the soils to provide an abundance of food for the microbes so that they can provide moisture and essential nutrients to the plants in the long term. It follows then that the greater the amount of the various solids introduced to the soil, the sooner the natural soil rejuvenation process will begin and the longer it will develop due to the abundance of food which becomes available to the microbes. The one thing I really want to reinforce is the cost-saving benefits of using a site-specific application. Imagine driving yourself on the site for an inspection and the grass is nice and green and growing well. The client is happy and you don't have to do any reworks or maintenance. It's a nice feeling, no worries or cares, everything is running smoothly and you can give yourself a pat on the back for a job well done. So what will save you money on grassing in poor quality soils? Again, it's simple. By using a site-specific application, the grass will grow sustainably, reducing the need for reworks and maintenance, and in return reducing costs and emissions. Being in the industry, we need to realise that the old ways don't work anymore. If we continue using products that aren't sustainable, then not only will it cost us more money in the long run, but we are just going to keep hurting the environment as well. It's up to us to be the leaders and provide new ways of doing things which are sustainable and leave less of an impact.